It is one of New Jersey's most disturbing unsolved murders, and it happened just very recently. A 35-year-old wife and new mother found dead in rural Morris County. And investigators have very little to go on, it would appear, on this case. This is the death of Brooke Hanland.
There's an emergency at our house. My wife isn't responding. Please hurry. Those were among the first desperate words that shattered the silence of an ordinary Saturday afternoon in Chester Township, New Jersey. Within minutes, emergency crews were racing toward a quiet home where a young family's future had suddenly been thrown into uncertainty. What they found would transform an ordinary emergency call into one of New Jersey's most unsettling homicide investigations.
Where was the husband? Where's the baby? Pretty much the same questions I think everybody has.
At first, it seemed like a tragedy unfolding behind closed doors. But as detectives began examining the evidence, they realized this case was anything but ordinary. Someone had entered that house with purpose. They appeared to know exactly where to go. And when they left investigators facing a question that still has no public answer. Why was Brooke Hanland targeted? Brooke wasn't a public figure. She wasn't living a life surrounded by controversy. She was a respected psychotherapist, a devoted wife, and a first-time mother whose days revolved around helping others.
It appears to have been a stabbing death.
Daughter.
It was in her own home in Chester Township, which is a very affluent community. I mean, you're talking about a population of just under 8,000 people, but a median household income of about $250,000. So, nice houses far apart. But then when something awful happens,
Yet somewhere within what appeared to be an ordinary life, detectives believed there was a missing piece, one that could explain why everything changed in a single afternoon. Over the course of this documentary, we'll carefully reconstruct the verified timeline, examine the publicly released evidence, and follow the investigation step by step. We'll separate confirmed facts from speculation, explore what investigators know, what they haven't disclosed, and why this case continues to raise difficult questions months later. Viewer discretion is advised. This documentary examines a real homicide investigation involving the loss of life. While we avoid graphic descriptions, some viewers may find the subject matter upsetting. If you're new to Darkness Protocol, welcome. We create carefully researched true crime documentaries built on verified facts, thorough investigations, and respect for the victims at the center of every case. Consider subscribing and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And to everyone who has supported this channel through your subscriptions, thoughtful discussions, likes, and shares, thank you. Your support helps keep attention on important cases like Brooke Hanland's and gives these stories the visibility they deserve.
Lots of people walk downtown, lots of people walk on the hiking trails. I mean, most people think the biggest threat is a bear, not, somebody breaking into a house or whatever happened. So, yeah, I would like to see a resolution.
Before her name appeared in news headlines across New Jersey, Brooke Hanland was known for something very different. To the people who knew her, she was someone who dedicated her career to helping others navigate some of the most difficult moments of their lives. Long before investigators began examining her final days, Brooke had spent years building a life centered on compassion, family, and service. Brooke Hanland was 35 years old and had deep roots in Chester Township, New Jersey, the community where she spent much of her childhood. Friends and neighbors described the area as close-knit, where families often knew one another for years. It was the kind of place where Brooke developed lasting connections before eventually leaving the state to pursue her education and career. She attended Wake Forest University, where she earned her undergraduate degree before continuing her studies at Northeastern University in Boston. There she completed a master's degree in clinical psychology, preparing for a profession that required patience, empathy, and trust. Those who entered the field alongside her understood the responsibility that came with helping people through anxiety, trauma, depression, and life's many challenges. Brooke chose that path willingly. After becoming a licensed psychotherapist, she built her career working with children, adolescents, adults, and families. Public records and professional profiles showed that her practice focused on providing mental health support to people facing a wide range of personal struggles. Former clients and colleagues publicly remembered her as thoughtful, attentive, and deeply committed to the people she served. Her work was never simply a job. It reflected the values she carried into every part of her life. While living in Massachusetts, Brooke met the man who would become her husband, James Hanlon. The couple married and began building a future together before deciding to return to New Jersey in 2023. Moving back allowed them to be closer to Brooke's family and the community where she had grown up, a decision that reflected the importance both placed on family life and long-term stability. By 2025, Brooke had entered what many would have considered one of the happiest chapters of her life. She and James welcomed their first child, a daughter, marking the beginning of a new role that friends say Brooke embraced with excitement and gratitude. Balancing motherhood with her professional career was a challenge she appeared ready to meet, and those close to her described her as optimistic about the future they were building together. From the outside, Brooke's life reflected years of careful planning and hard work. She had established a respected career, returned home to be near loved ones, and started a family of her own. Nothing in the public record suggested that her name would soon become associated with one of the most closely watched homicide investigations in New Jersey. To understand why her case continues to resonate, it is essential to first understand the life she had built before everything changed. By the time Brooke Hanland returned to New Jersey, she wasn't simply moving back to a familiar place. She and her husband, James Hanlon, were beginning a new chapter that reflected years of planning. After spending several years together in Massachusetts, the couple made the decision to settle in Chester Township, where Brooke had grown up. The move placed them closer to family and offered the opportunity to raise their daughter in the same community that had shaped Brooke's early life. Friends who spoke publicly after Brooke's death consistently described the couple as excited about becoming first-time parents. Like many young families, they were adjusting to the routines that come with caring for an infant while balancing careers and everyday responsibilities. Their daughter had become the center of their daily lives, and much of their time revolved around building a stable home for her future. Professionally, Brooke continued working as a licensed psychotherapist. Her practice involves supporting children, adolescents, adults, and families facing a variety of emotional and behavioral challenges. The work demanded confidentiality, patience, and consistency. It was a career built on trust, and colleagues remembered Brooke as someone who approached each client with compassion and professionalism. Even with the responsibilities of new motherhood, she remained committed to helping the people who depended on her. Outside of work, Brooke's life appeared structured around family. Public accounts suggest she maintained close relationships with relatives and valued staying connected with those who had known her for years. Returning to Chester Township also meant reconnecting with longtime friends and becoming part of a familiar neighborhood once again. Those who lived nearby described the area as quiet, with residents who looked out for one another and appreciated the privacy that came with the township's wooded surroundings. To neighbors, Brooke and James appeared to be settling comfortably into their new home. There were no widely reported public disputes or incidents involving the family before the investigation began. Friends who later reflected on Brooke's life spoke about her kindness, her dedication to others, and her excitement about raising her daughter. Their memories painted the picture of someone who had invested years in building both a meaningful career and a close-knit family life. From every publicly available account, Brooke's days followed a routine familiar to many working parents, balancing professional responsibilities with the demands of caring for a young child while creating a home near the people she loved most. It was a life that, from the outside, appeared grounded, purposeful, and filled with plans for the future. In the days before Brooke Hanland's death, There was little in the public record to suggest that anything was out of the ordinary. She continued balancing the responsibilities of her career with the demands of caring for her young daughter while settling into the home she and her husband had established after returning to Chester Township. From the outside, life appeared to be following the rhythm of a young family adapting to a new chapter. After moving back to New Jersey in 2023, Brooke had reestablished both personal and professional ties in the community where she grew up. By the summer of 2026, she was continuing her work as a licensed psychotherapist while raising her first child, who had been born the previous year. Friends and relatives later described this period as one focused on family, work, and building a future close to loved ones. One of the few publicly reported events from those final days came from a neighbor who had occasional contact with Brooke's husband, James Connor Hanlon. According to the neighbor, the two had exchanged text messages just a few days earlier about a bear that had gotten into the trash near their properties. The conversation was described as ordinary and neighborly, exactly the kind of exchange that would not have attracted attention at the time. The neighbor later said that June 2 was the last time he heard from James. Beyond that, investigators have released very little about Brooke's movements during the final week of her life. Authorities have not publicly disclosed her appointments, phone activity, digital communications, or the identities of the last people known to have seen or spoken with her. That silence has been deliberate. In active homicide investigations, investigators often withhold portions of a timeline to preserve details that can help evaluate witness statements and distinguish credible information from speculation. The same restraint applies to Brooke's daily routine. While it is publicly known that she continued her professional work and family life, officials have not released a detailed hour-by-hour account of her final days. They have also declined to discuss whether investigators identified any unusual activity in the neighborhood before the homicide, or whether any surveillance footage captured events that could be relevant to the case. As those quiet days gave way to an ordinary Saturday afternoon, there was no public indication that Brooke's routine was about to be interrupted. The answers to what happened next would become the focus of one of New Jersey's most closely watched homicide investigations. But at this stage, investigators were only beginning to assemble the timeline from the evidence they collected. Saturday, the 7th of June 2025, began like any other weekend in Chester Township. The quiet Morris County community was settling into a typical summer afternoon. Neighbors carried on with their routines, traffic remained light, and there was no public indication that anything unusual had happened inside one of the homes on Dow Road. According to authorities, Brooke Hanland was at the residence that afternoon. Publicly released information has not established a detailed timeline of her activities earlier that day, and investigators have intentionally withheld many specifics. That decision is common in active homicide investigations, where preserving undisclosed facts can help investigators evaluate witness statements and protect the integrity of the case. Shortly before 5 p.m., the day took a dramatic turn. At approximately 4:45 p.m., Morris County emergency dispatchers received a 911 call reporting an unresponsive person inside the home. The caller was Brooke's husband, James Hanlon, who had returned to the residence and requested immediate medical assistance. Emergency medical personnel, along with officers from the Chester Township Police Department, were dispatched without delay. Within minutes, first responders arrived at the property. Their initial priority was to assess the situation and provide emergency care. Despite those efforts, Brooke was pronounced dead at the scene. Because of the circumstances encountered inside the residence, responding officers quickly recognized that the incident required far more than a routine medical response. The home was immediately secured, and access to the property was restricted as additional law enforcement personnel arrived. Detectives from the Morris County Prosecutor's Office Major Crimes Unit were notified, along with members of the Morris County Sheriff's Office Crime Scene Investigation Unit. Those agencies assumed responsibility for documenting the scene and beginning what would become a complex homicide investigation. As investigators took control of the residence, the normally quiet neighborhood began to change. Emergency vehicles lined portions of the roadway, and residents noticed the increased law enforcement presence. Many neighbors later recalled seeing investigators working into the evening, though officials released very little information about what was occurring inside the home. That evening, authorities publicly confirmed only a limited number of facts. They identified the victim as Brooke Hanland, confirmed that the investigation involved a homicide, and stated that detectives were actively working to determine exactly what had happened. Beyond those initial announcements, investigators remained cautious, declining to discuss potential motives, possible suspects, or specific evidence. For the public, the lack of information created uncertainty. For investigators, however, the work had only begun. Every minute after that emergency call became part of a carefully reconstructed timeline, one that detectives hoped would reveal who was responsible and why Brooke Hanland had been targeted. With the residence secured, the investigation entered its next phase. What had begun as an emergency response quickly became a coordinated forensic operation involving multiple agencies, each with a specific role in documenting, preserving, and analyzing evidence. At this stage, investigators were not focused on reaching conclusions. Their priority was to establish the facts, piece by piece. The home on Dow Road became the center of that effort. Access was tightly controlled to protect the integrity of the scene. Only authorized personnel were permitted inside, while officers maintained a perimeter around the property to prevent contamination of potential evidence. Standard protocol required investigators to document the scene exactly as they found it before anything was moved or collected. Leading the investigation was the Morris County Prosecutor's Office Major Crimes Unit, working alongside the Chester Township Police Department. Specialists from the Morris County Sheriff's Office Crime Scene Investigation Unit were also called to assist. Together, these agencies began the methodical process of photographing the residence, documenting observations, identifying areas of evidentiary value, and collecting materials that could later be examined in a laboratory. As with any major homicide investigation, detectives looked beyond what could be seen inside the home. They sought to reconstruct the physical environment, identify possible points of entry and exit, and determine whether anything suggested movement before or after the incident. At the same time, investigators canvassed the surrounding neighborhood, speaking with nearby residents and searching for surveillance systems that might have captured activity in the area during the relevant time period. Another essential part of the investigation involved the Morris County Medical Examiner's Office. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy to establish the official cause and manner of death. Authorities later confirmed that Brooke Hanland died as a result of multiple sharp force injuries, and the manner of death was officially ruled homicide. Beyond those findings, investigators deliberately withheld additional forensic details, a common practice intended to preserve information known only to those directly involved in the investigation. While forensic specialists processed physical evidence from the residence, detectives simultaneously began reviewing other forms of evidence, including digital records and information gathered during the initial response. Investigators have not publicly disclosed the full scope of what was recovered or how each piece of evidence fits into the case. That level of confidentiality is often maintained in active investigations to protect future interviews, evaluate witness statements, and preserve the integrity of any future prosecution. By the end of those first critical hours, investigators had transformed a single emergency call into a structured forensic investigation. Every photograph, every collected item, and every documented observation became part of a growing body of evidence that detectives hoped would eventually explain not only what happened inside the home, but also who was responsible. As the physical evidence was being processed, investigators turn their attention to another critical part of every homicide investigation: victimology. In simple terms, victimology is the process of understanding the victim's life in as much detail as possible. Detectives ask a straightforward question: who was this person, and did anything in their daily life help explain why they became a target? This stage of the investigation reaches far beyond the crime scene itself. Detectives begin by examining the victim's personal and professional relationships. Family members, close friends, co-workers, neighbors, and acquaintances may all provide pieces of information that help investigators understand routines, recent events, or changes in behavior. The purpose is not to cast suspicion, but to build an accurate picture of the victim's life before the crime. Employment is another important focus. Brooke Hanland worked as a licensed psychotherapist, a profession built on confidentiality and trust. Investigators would naturally seek to understand her work schedule, professional responsibilities, and any circumstances that might be relevant to the investigation, while also respecting the legal and ethical protections surrounding client information. Authorities have not publicly indicated that her profession has been linked to the case. Financial activity is also reviewed as part of standard investigative procedure. Detectives often examine bank transactions, purchases, and other financial records to establish timelines or identify unusual activity. At the same time, they analyze phone records, text messages, emails, and other digital communications to reconstruct the victim's final days. These records can help confirm movements, identify contacts, and verify the sequence of events. Investigators also study the victim's daily habits and digital footprint. Information such as location data, online activity, security systems, and publicly available surveillance footage can help establish where someone was and when. Even routine activities can become important when detectives are trying to build an accurate timeline. In Brooke Hanland's case, authorities have intentionally kept much of this work confidential. That decision is consistent with investigative best practices. Releasing too much information too early could compromise interviews, influence witness statements, or reveal details that only the person responsible would know. For detectives, victimology is not about making assumptions. It is about carefully separating verified facts from speculation and allowing the evidence to guide the investigation. Once the crime scene had been documented and the initial forensic work was underway, detectives shifted their attention to the broader investigation. From that point forward, the objective was no longer simply to determine what had happened inside the home, but to establish who was responsible and whether the available evidence could explain why Brooke Hanlon had been targeted. Every decision was guided by one principle: follow the evidence before forming conclusions. The investigation was led by the Morris County Prosecutor's Office Major Crimes Unit, working alongside the Chester Township Police Department, with continued assistance from the Morris County Sheriff's Office Crime Scene Investigation Unit. Each agency had a distinct role. Crime scene investigators focused on preserving and analyzing physical evidence, while detectives began reconstructing Brooke's final known movements and identifying everyone who might have had relevant information. One of the first priorities was conducting interviews. Detectives routinely begin with the people closest to the victim, not because they are presumed to be involved, but because they are often the best source of information about the victim's recent activities, daily routines, and state of mind. Family members, friends, neighbors, co-workers, and anyone known to have interacted with Brooke in the days leading up to her death would have been interviewed to help establish an accurate timeline. Investigators compare these accounts carefully, looking for consistencies, gaps, or details that require further verification. At the same time, detectives began assembling a digital timeline. Modern homicide investigations rely heavily on electronic records to verify movements and communications. Investigators typically review mobile phone records, text messages, call logs, location data, emails, and other digital information that has been lawfully obtained. These records can confirm when devices were active, where they may have traveled, and who was in contact with the victim. Authorities have not publicly disclosed the specific findings from Brooke Hanland's digital records, and that information remains part of the active investigation. Surveillance evidence became another area of focus. Investigators canvassed the surrounding neighborhood to determine whether any residential security cameras, business surveillance systems, or traffic cameras had captured activity before or after the incident. Even footage that does not show the crime itself can be valuable. A vehicle passing through the area, a person walking nearby, or an unusual movement at a particular time can help detectives narrow the timeline and either confirm or eliminate investigative leads. Officials have not publicly stated whether any surveillance footage has played a significant role in the case. Detectives also conducted an extensive neighborhood canvass. Officers went door to door speaking with residents, asking whether anyone had noticed unfamiliar vehicles, unexpected visitors, unusual sounds, or activity that stood out from the normal routine of the neighborhood. In investigations like this, even seemingly minor observations can become significant once they are compared with physical and digital evidence. Some neighbors later spoke publicly about the increased police presence, but authorities have not indicated that any single witness account has resolved the case. As investigators gathered information, they worked to reconstruct Brooke's final timeline with as much precision as possible. Every verified phone call, confirmed sighting, documented movement, and electronic record was examined to establish what was known, and just as importantly, what remained unknown. Building that timeline is essential because it allows investigators to test witness statements against objective evidence rather than relying on memory alone. Throughout the investigation, law enforcement released only limited information to the public. That decision prompted questions from both the media and the community, but investigators explained that withholding certain details was necessary to protect the integrity of the case. In active homicide investigations, keeping key facts confidential helps detectives evaluate future tips, identify false confessions, and determine whether a witness possesses information that has never been made public. It also helps preserve evidence for any future court proceedings. The Morris County Prosecutor's Office repeatedly emphasized that the investigation remained active and urged anyone with information, no matter how insignificant it might seem, to come forward. Authorities also announced a reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction, hoping that renewed public attention would generate new leads. At the same time, investigators cautioned against speculation, recognizing that unverified claims could complicate the investigative process and cause additional pain for Brooke's family. Despite months of investigative work, detectives have released very few details about the evidence they have collected or the investigative theories they are pursuing. That silence should not be mistaken for inactivity. In complex homicide investigations, progress often occurs behind the scenes through laboratory analysis, follow-up interviews, the review of digital evidence, and the careful verification of every lead. For investigators, solving the case depends not on the speed of the investigation, but on building a case supported by reliable evidence that can withstand scrutiny in court. As news of Brooke Hanland's death spread beyond Chester Township, the investigation quickly became more than a local story. Friends, neighbors, colleagues, and complete strangers struggled to understand how someone remembered for helping others could lose her life under such unexplained circumstances. The case drew widespread attention across New Jersey and soon began appearing in national news coverage, bringing renewed focus to the unanswered questions surrounding the investigation. For Brooke's family, the days that followed were marked by profound loss and a determination to preserve the memory of the woman they knew beyond the headlines. Among those who spoke publicly was Brooke's sister, Paige Haggerty, who described Brooke as a loving mother, devoted wife, daughter, sister, and friend whose kindness had touched countless lives. Rather than allowing the tragedy to define Brooke, her family urged the public to remember the compassion, generosity, and dedication that had shaped her life long before the investigation began. The response from Brooke's professional community reflected those same sentiments. Colleagues and former clients remembered her as a therapist who approached every person with patience and genuine empathy. Many shared that Brooke had chosen a profession centered on helping people through some of life's most difficult moments, making the news of her death especially difficult for those who had worked alongside her or benefited from her care. Within Chester Township, neighbors expressed both sadness and concern. Residents described the community as a place where violent crime is uncommon, making the investigation deeply unsettling for many families. As investigators continued their work, members of the public closely followed official updates, hoping each announcement would bring new answers. Law enforcement also turned to the community for assistance. The Morris County Prosecutor's Office repeatedly encouraged anyone with information, no matter how insignificant it might seem, to contact investigators. Officials emphasized that even a seemingly minor observation could prove valuable when combined with other evidence. A reward was also announced for information leading to an arrest and conviction, reinforcing the commitment to pursuing every credible lead. Throughout the investigation, Brooke's family has consistently asked for privacy while expressing gratitude for the support they have received from friends, neighbors, and the wider public. At the same time, investigators have encouraged responsible discussion of the case, reminding the public that verified information, not speculation, offers the best chance of bringing clarity to an investigation that remains active. Months after Brooke Hanland's death, the investigation remains active, but many of the most important questions have yet to be answered publicly. Despite extensive work by investigators, no arrests have been announced, and no individual has been publicly identified by law enforcement as a suspect. Officials have continued to stress that the investigation is ongoing and that they are following the evidence wherever it leads. The Morris County Prosecutor's Office Major Crimes Unit, working alongside the Chester Township Police Department and the Morris County Sheriff's Office Crime Scene Investigation Unit, has repeatedly confirmed that detectives continue to review evidence, follow up on leads, and evaluate information received from the public. While the pace of updates has slowed, authorities have emphasized that this should not be interpreted as a lack of progress. In many homicide investigations, significant work takes place away from public view through laboratory testing, digital analysis, witness re-interviews, and the careful comparison of evidence. Investigators have remained deliberate about what they release. Many details surrounding the evidence, the timeline, and the investigative strategy have never been made public. That approach is intentional. By keeping certain facts confidential, detectives can better assess future witness statements, verify new information, and preserve evidence that may become critical if criminal charges are eventually filed. To encourage additional leads, authorities announced a reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person responsible. Investigators continue to encourage anyone who may have seen unusual activity, noticed unfamiliar vehicles, or possesses information, no matter how insignificant it may seem, to contact law enforcement. In cases that remain unsolved, even a single overlooked detail can sometimes change the direction of an investigation. Several important questions also remain unanswered in the public record. Investigators have not disclosed whether Brooke was specifically targeted or whether the incident was connected to someone known to her. They have not publicly explained whether surveillance footage, digital evidence, or forensic analysis has identified a clear investigative path. Likewise, authorities have not revealed whether they believe one individual or multiple people may have been involved. Those answers remain known only to the investigative team. As of the time this documentary was produced, Brooke Hanland's case remains an active and unsolved homicide investigation. Detectives continue to ask for the public's assistance while working methodically through every available lead. For Brooke's family, friends, and community, the hope remains that continued investigative efforts, and perhaps one crucial piece of information, will eventually provide the answers that have remained out of reach since that summer afternoon. The death of Brooke Hanland remains one of the most troubling unsolved homicide cases in recent New Jersey history. What began as an ordinary summer afternoon ended with the loss of a respected psychotherapist, a devoted wife, and a new mother whose life had been dedicated to helping others. While investigators have carefully reconstructed much of the known timeline, the question at the heart of the case remains unanswered. Who was responsible, and why? For Brooke's family, justice means far more than identifying the person responsible. It means preserving the memory of the woman they knew beyond the headlines: a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother, a trusted therapist, and a friend whose compassion left a lasting impact on the lives of so many. As this investigation continues, every credible lead still matters. If you have information that could assist law enforcement, contact the appropriate authorities directly. If you don't, you can still help by sharing Brooke's story responsibly and avoiding speculation that could complicate an active investigation.
If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing to Darkness Protocol. Every view, comment, and share helps keep attention on real cases that deserve to be remembered. We also invite you to join the discussion below by sharing your thoughts respectfully. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next documentary.